Good evening and welcome to Our World. Tonight, the future of our greatest natural treasure in the final enthralling chapter of the 9 network production, Inside the Reef.
Hello, Dean Felton. In this, the final episode of our documentary series on the Great Barrier Reef, we're going to try a little crystal ball gazing. I'm in one of nature's special places, a rare spot where the reef meets the rainforest, a place where the present points the way to the future.
Every part of Australia's Great Barrier Reef has at least one feature that makes it outstanding. It's impossible to single out any one place as being the best part of the reef. But scattered along its 2,000 kilometres are a few spots with that extra something that makes them unique. And it's the unique places which seem to be threatened most by damage that could ruin the very best parts of a magnificent resource.
The idea that the Great Barrier Reef is somehow under threat is nothing new. We've been worried about the Crown of Thorns for years. As well, there were threats from oil drilling and mining, but the latest concern comes from people pressure, the problems that arise simply because so many people want to come and look at such a beautiful part of the world.
We can see the challenges we face in the years ahead by looking at what we've done to the reef in the past and by studying what's happening right now. The pointers to the future can be found in locations as varied as the offshore islands and reefs, a floating hotel 72 kilometres offshore, the tourism explosion up and down the coast, and the unspoiled parts of the mainland facing the sea. As the reef stretches north towards New Guinea, the wilderness ashore is as untouched as the waters of the nearby reef. The rainforests of the tropical north cascade down the hills and the gullies, stopping only at the water's edge. In places, it's possible to have your feet on the reef while reaching up to hold a piece of rainforest. In this area, we can see what the coastline was like in its original wild state, before the land was cleared, first for farming and later for tourism. The rainforest here is linked to the ocean. A change in the jungle means a change in the reef. Every time a road is pushed into the wilderness or a piece of land is cleared for any reason, the runoff washes into the ocean. The coast north of the Daintree River is a part of the barrier reef where the frontiers are being pushed back, and nowhere is there a greater controversy over what should be sacrificed in the name of progress. The Daintree is wild country. Rivers and creeks are still home to man-eating crocodiles. The future will certainly see the destruction of at least part of this wilderness, much to the disgust of conservationists who say new roads and the runoff will kill not only trees, but coral on the reef. Scientists are now finding the truth of those claims that our trampling the rainforest has also damaged the reef.
There's been no effect that we've been able to detect that can be related to the sediment runoff from the Cape Tribulation Road on the fringing reefs or on any of the other reefs out there.
Tony Ayling is an independent marine consultant who's researching the effect of sediment on coral on behalf of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority.
One of our study sites was deliberately chosen to be where quite a big river comes out at the base of one of the very steep inclines. There's tremendous red rush of sediment right across the reef. There's been no coral death there, in spite of the fact that it's quite literally covered in red sediment-loaded water.
Tony has no axe to grind on behalf of developers or road builders. He lives isolated with his family deep in the rainforest and hates the idea of roads, not because of the damage they do, but because of his profound appreciation of the natural beauty of the jungle. Even though the runoff doesn't seem to hurt the reef, the conservationists are probably right about roads killing coral, but in another way. Again, it's people pressure. With every new road come new travellers. Demand will create new excuses to open more rainforest to private ownership. Roads bring development, and that will certainly mean more visitors for the coral reefs offshore. We can see a classic example of development almost in the shadow of the Danetree's tall timbers. Port Douglas, a place that's grown from country town to tourist hotspot in less than 10 years. This old sugar town off the beaten track became a perfect illustration of how tourism transforms.
Port Douglas began as a place that was discovered by the select few, adventurous folk who didn't mind the lack of amenities here. The place itself made up for everything. Next came the wealthy. They liked what they'd heard about Port Douglas, and before long, the place had become a sort of elite hideaway.
The third stage of tourism is again for the wealthy, resorts for the luxury end of the market. An entire plantation of oil palms was transplanted here as part of a man-made landscape covering more than 200 hectares. Sheraton Mirage is the newest resort on the Barrier Reef coast and the closest five-star hotel to the reef. What's been done here has changed the look of Port Douglas forever. The opulence will be a hard act to follow. This resort has placed Port Douglas on the World Traveller's map, and fame leads to the final stage of tourism growth. The more luxurious hotels are followed by budget developers. Ironically, the better the original, the faster the low-cost operators will move in to provide average facilities for average tourists. It's already starting to happen at Port Douglas, and it's this final stage that can pose the greatest threats to a reef. Australia's north is booming. International arrivals in Queensland have practically doubled in just 1 year. A new airport in the northern city of Cairns helped spark the boom, and now, just a few years after completion, it's too small for the traffic coming to see the Barrier Reef. Projections for the future say that well over 1 million people a year will pass through this airport alone by 1990. Handling the numbers of people will be easy compared with the challenge of ensuring that we still have reefs worth visiting. Although the Great Barrier Reef is made up of literally thousands of individual reefs or islands, only a few are within easy reach. And these are the places that are most valuable to tourism and will also be the places most under pressure in years to come. The modern way of showing off the outer reef to people in bulk is on fast catamarans running day trips to pontoons anchored by the coral. Nothing seems to stop or slow down the daily invasion of the most accessible reefs up and down the coast. Already there are millions of visitors a year, all of them intent on getting close to a coral reef. The potential is there for apparently insignificant damage to the coral to be multiplied so many times that it accumulates into something incredibly destructive. But it need not happen. The reef can be protected from the worst of accidental damage.
Well, what we do every time we come out here, every day, both in the buses and also once they get to the reef, people are mentioning to people that it is a marine park that should be preserved. Try not to touch the coral because you're not only going to injure yourself, you're going to injure them. Also, in our particular part of things, we take people on guided snorkeling trips and we're trying to explain to people what's going on so that they have some sort of appreciation for what could happen if they do happen to damage it.
Agincourt is one of the closest reefs to the mainland anywhere on the coast. The Quicksilver Company brings visitors here only with a permit from the Marine Park Authority. Make a mess of this reef and they probably won't get another one. A strong incentive to take special care. What we saw personally of this reef confirmed that Agincourt has been well cared for, that even such intensive people pressure can be handled if enough care is taken. This far below the surface, the coral is safe from snorkelers and the scuba divers don't seem to have caused any serious disturbance. Even the corals most easily damaged have survived largely intact. The nursery bommy is the most popular dive site at Agincourt Reef. As divers spiral around its edge, they discover a never-ending variety of fascinating marine life. The nursery is a huge column of coral covering roughly the same ground space as a house, but it's at least 5 times as tall, 30 metres from the bottom to where it just breaks the surface. To look at the reef only a short distance from the pontoon, it's hard to believe that this area has had hundreds of thousands of human visitors. But when we talk about the future of spots like this, we should remember that it's had intensive use for only a few short years. Decades down the line, things could well be different. Every boat, every structure that sits on or floats over the reef has the potential to bring destruction to a greater or lesser degree. One of the most controversial is attached to a huge underwater anchoring system on John Brewer Reef. 135 tonnes of steel is suspended in the sea from a giant swivel. Chains fan out in a star pattern for 230 metres in every direction to a series of buried anchors. The whole device is a massive counterweight, and on the surface overhead is a piece of the future here today. A floating hotel as big as a cruise ship in the sea off Townsville. It's the first of its kind anywhere in the world. Luxury afloat with all the facilities you find in a hotel on solid ground.
The whole concept of a floating structure on the reef reaches the ultimate in places like this, fully self-contained communities. This one happens to be a hotel, but really there's no reason why any building, even a whole residential town, couldn't be built floating on the reef. It's easy to imagine, say, half a dozen floating buildings like this one, all within sight of each other, like a modern-day Atlantis.
But before anything like that happens, the world's first floating hotel will have to prove itself. Even though seeing is believing, it's still a surprise to find that someone has been daring enough to build something so radically different. The world of dry land seems incongruous afloat in the Coral Sea. But after a while, you get used to it. You almost forget where you are, but not quite.
Despite having all the comforts of a modern luxury suite, every so often here you come across little reminders that this is no ordinary hotel.
Experience, however, suggests life jackets won't be needed.
This is the general working area.
David Baxendale was trained as a ship's engineer. He explains that guests will be evacuated for bad weather, and besides, the hotel has shown what it can take.
Well, Cyclone Charlie decided to attack us before opening, so it was a very good test from our point of view. The eye of the cyclone passed right across this area, The one damage we did sustain was a cracked window, which was done by the staff clearing deck furniture from outside.
What about pollution, particularly in an environmentally sensitive area such as the reef?
Well, this probably comes back to our environmental impact statement in the first place. One thing we had to be conscious of was nothing was allowed to go over the side.
Sewage, wastewater and garbage is either incinerated or carried away by barge. So far, everything has worked on the flotel itself. But other floating structures around it have had problems. Some blew away in the cyclone. This one sank on the reef. In many respects, the decision is still being made on whether the flotel is a good or a bad thing. Many people think it's too new to make judgments yet. But in terms of people floating around the reef, there are far worse things. A couple of hundred small boats carry as many people as a floating hotel, and today there are many thousands of them using the reef. Practically all of them pump out raw sewage and waste. Almost all of them drop their anchors on the coral, and in the future